I used to play with things like this more on camera. Tops, coins, other stuff. I just find them calming. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and this is not to back or not to back. If you show up here every Monday, you're used to one of two things happening. Either a to back or not to back, or some sort of video about, Kickstarters I regret backing, Kickstarters I love backing, top 10 highest funded Kickstarters of all time. It's usually something Kickstarter focused. In general, Monday is to back or not to back day, where we go over all the current Kickstarters. The problem is this week there's not really that much that's interesting, and certainly not long enough for a full dedicated to back or not to back. We'll be back with one of those next week. This week instead is something different. And it's not a Kickstarter list video either. It's a conversation about how Kickstarter isn't working anymore. And that's not the title. That's not the thumbnail. I'm not going for controversial headers in this one. Haven't figured out the exact title or thumbnail yet, but it's going to be something less obnoxious and less, Kickstarter's broken. It doesn't work. The magic is gone. It won't have that because it's partially true, but it's not fully true. And my goal with this video is not to cause drama. Practically speaking, Kickstarter is messier right now than it used to be. And by Kickstarter, for full context, I mean any form of crowdfunding. Kickstarter, GameFound, BackerKit's not out yet, on tabletop, doesn't really have that much of a presence. So let's go with Kickstarter and GameFound. Over the past year and a half or so, Kickstarter has been a messier place than usual. It's been a harder place to guarantee that you'll get any sort of good deal. Prices are going up. Prices of the games themselves. Shipping's going up. A lot of things are getting messier, and trust is harder to find. You see, Kickstarter is incredible for the hobby when it's working, at least in my opinion. I actually did a video a while ago, I'll link to it down below. It's kind of choose your own adventure of, is Kickstarter good for board games? And you can watch that. I'll link to it down below. It's a choose your own adventure, so pick whichever lane you want. And I go through 5 reasons why Kickstarter is good for the hobby and bad for the hobby. But personally speaking, for myself, while the goal of that video was to give you options and choices and let you see whatever you wanted to see, confirmation bias as it were, the practical reality is that my own personal belief system is that I think Kickstarter is generally excellent for the hobby. I think Kickstarter in general, excluding the current world situation, I think Kickstarter is a good thing. I think it allows people to be more invested in the journey. It allows people to be a part of the journey, to add their voice to the conversation, to vote on what they do or don't like about a game, to have those conversations, to give that feedback to the publisher, to allow the publisher to see how popular or wanted a game is. It allows pricing that doesn't always otherwise exist. Deluxe copies, things that are over the top in expenses. It allows for a lot of things that would never exist in a world outside Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter for board games is overall a boon to the hobby. Not essential, but allowing us to see parts of board gaming we might not otherwise see. Allowing us to see creations and passion and new creators break free from the constraints of traditional publishing in a way that keeps, those corporate overlord Asmodee that a lot of people like to dislike. I don't even know if it's Asmodee anymore. I don't know who owns Asmodee or the name of I don't know who's the current ownership of it. But whenever you dislike the large behemoths of board gaming doing their thing, Kickstarter allows the smaller companies to have a voice, to sit there and be part of the conversation, and for them to then turn into their own companies, sometimes staying on Kickstarter, sometimes going off Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter is overall a great thing for the hobby. I also think Kickstarter doesn't work well with the unknown. I think as a platform, as an entity, I do not think Kickstarter works well when you're talking about the state of the unknown. The state of how much is freight going to cost down the road? How much is anything going to cost down the road? What's the MSRP of a product that might not deliver for 18 months in a world of changing MSRPs because of the nature of the board game hobby, the board game space? The practical reality is that things are different now. Between COVID, years of COVID, between the freight industry and everything that goes on with freight and the cost and the ballooning of freight, and yes, it's trickling down a bit, but it's certainly not where it used to be. Between the uncertainty in Russia, between fuel surcharges, do you know what the final mile fuel charges on shipments are? It's huge. The extra cost it gets to get anything shipped in this country right now, it's gone up significantly. And these things are trickier not just because they exist in a state of right now being different than the past, but because they also exist in a state of right now being different than the future. And people don't know which direction that sways. In traditional retail involves I come up with a game, I figure out the pricing, I figure out this, I do all the stuff, but I'm not charging you for the game until later. So all the stuff that goes into the game, it's messy, it's bad, it's still not good. I might have designed a game with a certain price point and budget and all those things in mind, and push comes to shove, when it's time to actually put those games on someone's shelf to sell them, the prices may have changed. But you didn't buy it a year and a half ago. You bought it today, and so it changes the conversation. As long as MSRPs are in line with everything else, it all looks good. I don't think that works as well with Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a conversation between a publisher and a backer, and the publisher is asking the backer to be a part of the conversation, to invest in the journey, to pay up front for something you'll get down the road. Now the first problem is that down the road is always a sketchy conversation. You know, a year, it's going to come in a year. Well, a year may have meant 14 months. Well, now a year might mean 18 months or 20 months as you desperately try to get your hands on a cargo container. As you guess now, today, right now, as you launch your next Kickstarter, as you guess what the state of the world looks like 18 months from now. They don't know. I don't know. You don't know. We're all making guesses. Even the people in the industry who know what's going on are still making guesses. The best information they have is not accurate information in a world that has changed. And I don't think Kickstarter works well with the state of the unknown. Both in terms of the shipping delays, in terms of the general when is a game coming and what's that going to look like, what kind of rolling blackouts is the factory in China going to have, and when is your game actually going to be produced? How many updates do you have to send updating your backers that things have changed since you last had a conversation, and the factory that swore up, down, left, right, and center is going to start before Chinese New Year is now being pushed till after Chinese New Year's because someone else got there first, and that's an extra 3-month delay because Chinese New Year is going to shut everything down, and unfortunately this is already a problem because that's going to lose you the cargo container, the freight ship that you booked, and now you're looking at 4 or 5 months out from an already delayed shipping thingy because you couldn't get everyone to work together doing the 3rd, 4th wave of COVID meltdowns that caused, a lack of playtesting and development. These things always happen, to be clear, but they happen more in the current state of the world. Estimates, by their very nature, are estimates and guesses of what happens. When you say, I think it'll take a year to get the game ready, what you really mean is it might take a year if everything goes well, but if things don't go well, it might take 14 months. And we just ballooned 14 months out to 18, 20, 22 months. Because no one really knows. And Kickstarter doesn't operate well with the state of the unknown because your answer might be, well, then guess harder. Guess 22 months. If you think it's 18, if you think it's 14, 22 months, guess 22 months. The problem is you might lose backers when you guess 22 months. When you say this game's not showing up for 2 years, you might lose people, even if the game will show up in 14 months. What's the incentive to go with the worst case scenario as opposed to the best case scenario, even the average? The incentive is the fact that people won't be upset later, but if you make them upset now, it doesn't make it any better. And so it leads to these difficult conversations because Kickstarter is a conversation between a publisher and a backer, asking the backer to buy a product today with the information that doesn't exist yet. And that's very tricky. And that's before we get into pricing, because pricing is much worse than shipping, than delays, not shipping. Pricing is the conversation of what is happening down the road. Because again, you're asking a price for a product today and you will not be able to deal with that product until later. That product is being sold later. And so what do you ask? What's the freight going to be like? What's the freight cost going to be like? What's the MSRP of the product going to be? What is the manufacturing material going to be? What about inflation? Inflation is a huge part of this conversation. In a world in which inflation is going up, in which currencies between different countries are not as stable as they used to be, in all those conversations, every single time you ask someone for money, you're asking them for money today for something that should have a price point a year and a half from now. And it's a harder conversation as far as what you do with that. How do you handle that situation? Kickstarter does not function as well with the state of the unknown. If you ask too much based on your perceived worst case scenario of what things will be down the road, well, you're going to scare people off. And people will accuse you of any number of different things, of, you're scamming them, of trying to take out the worst of them, of companies trying to gouge their consumers. And I just don't think companies are trying to scam their consumers. I think companies make money, mind you. We'll come back to the whole scam conversation shortly. It's very hard to ask for a price point today based on the question of what things should be like tomorrow. Again, the common refrain here is Kickstarter does not work as well with the state of the unknown. Kickstarter works well with what's happening today, with what we know today, with what's going on, with what's consistent and what's expected and what we can reliably rely on. And that just hasn't been true for a long time. For months now, forget months, for 10, 11, 12 months, for a year now, people have been saying that this crisis was coming, that freight was a problem, that things were going to be messy out there, and shockingly enough, things are messy out there. A lot of people saw the warning, saw the videos, saw the conversations, and kind of said, okay, that means today. It doesn't mean tomorrow. It meant tomorrow. It meant today and tomorrow and the next day until this is over. And so people walk into crowdfunding with a different expectation than I think is realistic nowadays. And I don't have a good answer. This video is not a conversation about why you should back Kickstarters. Not in the slightest. If anything, this video is a conversation about why you shouldn't back Kickstarters. Which is not going to have publishers any more thankful for this video than anyone else. That's not necessarily what they want. That's definitely not what they want. This video is about expectations. It's about understanding what Kickstarter is and what it isn't. It's about when Kickstarter works and when it doesn't. And when you might have to walk in with different expectations if you don't want to be upset at every single creator that you want to label a scammer or someone trying to take your money because they're just trying to not shut down. And that might make Kickstarter not a place for you. Right now. In the state of the unknown. Because it works well as a platform in times of certainty. It works well when there's higher degrees of trust out of it. But a state of an unknown leads to a greater degree of uncertainty. And a greater degree of uncertainty leads to a lower degree of trust. And a lower degree of trust with someone who has your money for 18 months and is putting out an update every 6 weeks and you want it every 3 weeks. It's not a conversation that works well for anyone. The backer is upset. The publisher feels stressed and pressured while they do everything they can. Everyone just ends up being upset and sad in this conversation. And there's no easy solutions. You can't just say, well, shut it all down, turn off Kickstarter, it's time to close up shop and go home. That's not the way many of these companies have been trying to operate. And it's not an easy solution to simply say, okay, well, let's just go to a retail market, even though we've been relying on running a business a certain way for a long time. Nor is it fair to say, well, you just have to suck it up. Because you shouldn't have to suck it up. I mean, why should this be your problem? It's not your problem. You backed something and it is their problem. Is it hard? Is it difficult? Of course it's hard and of course difficult, but it's not your problem. Where your problem comes in is the fact that you should know this by now. By now we should understand what Kickstarter is and isn't and where it functions well and when it doesn't. And that sometimes, if you sign up for a project when the world is in a state of flux, when things are changing in 18-month timelines, when numbers are changing, when rolling blackouts, when production costs, when freight costs, when all these things are changing on a month-by-month basis, and people are trying to predict prices for 18 months down the road, understand that does result in a degree of uncertainty. And uncertainty does not mean scamming. It does not mean anyone trying to get one over you. It just means that everyone's trying to do their best with what limited information and guesswork they have. And they're trying not to shut down, as many companies left, right, and center have. We've seen it happen. Companies are shutting down a lot. I talked about this yesterday in yesterday's video about Come On and Cyberpunk 27, an amusing video in its own right, because a lot of people saw very different things in that video. Anything from me being a Come On apologist to, yay, Alex is finally saying it like it is. People saw what they wanted to see in that video. I tried to be balanced, and we'll put it this way. There are a lot of people who, on the backer side, who weren't happy with the video, and I guarantee you Come On was not too happy with that video either, so I probably ticked off both sides, which is the nature of balance, I guess. Understand, I guess the takeaway from this video, and the point of this video, and the reason I'm doing this video is that Kickstarter does not work as well, crowdfunding does not work as well when there's a state of unknown. And what we currently have is a state of unknown. And I think that for yourself, for your own mental sanity, for the companies that you're backing's mental sanity, I think you should operate with a greater degree of grace should you choose to continue backing crowdfunding projects while this state of uncertainty exists. Companies are going to do their best. But to be clear, their best means they're going to do their best not to shut down. They're not going to do their best to be millionaires. They're not going to do their best to make bank off of cheating you out of your money. But they will do their best not to shut down, which is the responsible thing to do. As long as they're doing so without, lying to you, which would be ideal. And it's not easy. But they feel like they suddenly have this obligation to explain themselves to you in a way that no retail company ever does. When you're at the game store looking at the price of whatever game is on the shelf, no one's sitting there saying, hey, you know what? I wonder if this game actually costs $17 to get here from China or not. You ultimately look at the price point and you make a decision as to whether the game is worth it. Whether you're buying it online or in a store, you make a decision about whether it's worth it to you and you move on with your life. Worst case scenario, you make it known that, hey, this game is not worth it to me. No one accuses the companies of trying to cheat them. No one accuses the game store of subtly marking up the price to try to scam you out of something. And yet Kickstarter, we have that more in Kickstarter. We have that sense of frustration, that sense of betrayal, because you're along for the journey. You're part of the conversation. You invested from the get-go. But it shouldn't really change much. You're buying a product. You're just buying a product a year in advance or 18 months in advance. Operate with a degree of grace that you would appreciate from others if you're going to be backing things on Kickstarter, knowing full well that it is a very hard market for anyone to run a Kickstarter in. And again, to be very clear, to be crystal clear, I'm not saying back Kickstarters. I'm not saying back anything that isn't worth it to you. Not in the slightest. That is the furthest thing from anything I would ever say on this channel. Back what is worth it to you. Back it 100% with the mindfulness of how much it's going to cost at retail. Is the extra worth it? Do you want to support the company or not? Back it with all those equations in your head 100%. But back it with grace. Back it with understanding. Back it with the knowledge that the state of the unknown means things could be messy. And that a company trying to keep their head above water may have to ask for things that they wouldn't have otherwise had to ask. And that might mean that they shouldn't be on Kickstarter, but it also means you probably shouldn't have backed it because by now you should know better. Forget the past. By now, the things you back going forward. If you've watched this video and you continue to back things with the expectation that it should all be gung-ho, crisp and clean, and no issues whatsoever, sometimes that will happen. Many times that will happen. But also it's messier out there. And so back responsibly. Back with grace. Back only what you want. But have a mind for the people on the other side. And they are people. There's companies, sure, but who do you think runs companies? Who do you think answers the emails? Who do you think reads the comments in the comment section? Who do you think made the game, what wrote art for the game, created and started the company? Who do you think deals with any number of these things? We are not they are not giant behemoths of entities that have no knowledge of what's going on. There are people on the other end of the comment section. There are people on the other end of the emails who are seeing the frustration, who are seeing the attacks, who are seeing the verbal abuse when it happens. And I'm not saying you're doing it. I'm saying it is happening. There are companies that have gotten death threats over delays. I know people who have actively gotten death threats over delays on Kickstarter campaigns. That is insanity. Absolute insanity. I'm not saying it's you. I'm not saying it's the majority. I'm saying it happens. So today's video is about that. It's about mindfulness. It's about the nature of the fact that Kickstarter is not broken, but it doesn't operate well in a state of unknown. And right now, and for who knows how much longer, we are currently in a state of unknown. And that's it. A little sad and morose, today's video. It's a conversation I think that needs to be had. And it's a conversation we've touched upon in many different ways. But I still see people backing Kickstarters, and I still see people being very upset about the consequences of when those Kickstarters don't go as well as expected. And I hear you. I do. But are you still backing them? Hoping for something to magically change in your favor. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. The next video will be more cheerful, I assume. I already filmed it probably. And as always, have a good one.